So the criminal conviction matrix for employers to actually agree on the severity of the conviction and what they will consider not hireable or hireable. So we absolutely recommend that organizations develop that, especially if, to your point, Jim, you need to train those that are having that interactive dialogue and the adjudication, and you need consistency. So who's ever doing the adjudicating, they should have guidelines to follow so that they don't have to be concerned about a discrimination charge in the future.
Exactly.
Alistair, I'm going to toss it over to you.
You've touched on it where, so are you seeing, because I know a lot of states, as they've gone to legalization around marijuana, have also put in sort of automatic expungement of convictions. Are you seeing a lot more activity around that where people are thinking things have been expunged, but maybe there was a step that wasn't communicated when, the politician said, now we're going to expunge these records? Is that becoming much more of an issue?
I haven't run across automatic expungement issues. What makes our job difficult is there are states like California that consider it important to remove date of birth from the criminal convictions. And that just drives our court researchers crazy because you have a John Smith that you're looking up. Well, all of a sudden there are 10,000 John Smiths, with a criminal conviction. So you have to look through all of those, and it reduces turnaround time very much.
So, Jim, another best practice that we recommend to clients is to understand what is actually being looked at for a criminal background check. So, what I mean by that is when you go to a background check company, there is a suite of services and a price range. And a number of times, employers will automatically say, oh, I'm going to go for the 1999 version of background checks. And they don't realize that it only covers the state that the person or the employer is in. So it's only a statewide search. And then all of a sudden later down the road, there's trouble and the employer is saying, well, wait a second, I did a background check. Why didn't I know that they had a serious, criminal history in another state? And it's because the background check was only within the state. Or there's also something, I'm going to add one more thing to your list to talk about, Jim. So, certainly knowing what you're paying for and where are the searches going on. The other is there's something that I found out doing this for many years. It says there's certain federal and military convictions that don't turn up on regular state and national background checks.
Right.
Which was also very interesting for me to know as an employer. And I only found that out again because somebody reported somebody disclosing that they had, these criminal convictions in these other types of courts. So can you talk about that a little bit?
In terms of searching for records for local criminal conviction searches, the employer needs to decide how many years of residential addresses or employment addresses they want to go back. Obviously, depending on the employer's objective, as you mentioned earlier, there's a cost to that. You have to find that balance between what the budget is for the cost and what you're willing to accept. And then you also mentioned federal crimes. So a lot of people think that there's only one place to go, but there isn't. You've got local criminal convictions that are processed by the state district attorney. And then there are federal district attorney. There are federal crimes which are processed by a federal district attorney. The way that an action is taken on a federal level is if the crime involved crossing state lines. So let's say somebody kidnapped somebody and brought them across state lines. That would be in federal district court, or they transported stolen goods over a state line. And most frequently and typically is the crime of embezzlement, which will involve crossing state lines. So Again, getting back to matching what your objectives are. If you have someone who is going to be in a financial position in your company, you want to make sure that you do that federal crime. And one thing you mentioned earlier, Tracy, was that link, and that link is most important. Where you link the job description with the types of criminal convictions that are going to be unacceptable. So that's important to communicate to the applicant.
Yeah, so I have to tell you how I stumbled across this and learned that my background checks weren't covering federal crimes. As I was hiring for a financial position, I hired the person. And then literally 3 weeks after I hired them, I got an email saying, how could you hire somebody that was embezzling from their previous company? And I immediately thought to myself, there's no way. They must be wrong. I did a criminal background check. But I was curious enough to start to look it up. And I found a newspaper article. And then I immediately called our background check company and I started asking questions. And that's when they said to me, oh, you didn't ask for a federal criminal background check. And I said, I didn't know that I had to. So it was really interesting how I learned about that. But most employers, if they don't ask the right questions, they won't know that that their background service doesn't cover that.
I'm familiar with that process with drug testing or actually with motor vehicle records, actually, where you look at the offense and say whether it's acceptable. Could you speak to that a little?
We have a number of clients where we will alert them that a particular individual's reports need to be reviewed. It's a best practice for consumer reporting agencies not to indicate that this individual should be hired or should not be hired. Our clients have to make that decision. We have flags on our reports where we think the client needs to review the information and make a decision.
From an employer perspective, Alistair, the background check decision matrix should be developed with senior leaders of your organization and an employment attorney. Always recommend that. Components of that matrix should be the type of offense, the severity of the offense, so felony, misdemeanor, what's acceptable, the time frame since the offense. So we had talked about this earlier, right? So was a person a juvenile? Has it been 20 years and they haven't, even though it was a felony, has it been 20 years and they've had a clean record since, right? Have a guideline for the recommended action. And I say a guideline because, it could say for something severe like, I don't know, armed robbery or, physical violence, it's going to be an immediate decline. I say that it's a guideline because there still should be some sort of an interactive dialogue process. When, the adjudication letter is sent, we're going to take adverse action if you don't reach out to us on X dates to talk, right? That always has to happen. It's part of the FCRA process, has to happen. So, but the matrix does help guide and makes the decision easy to ensure that there is a standard practice for a certain type of offense that is in place for those types of convictions.